Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the polling station. It's Johnny Ward and William Kedjanyi, and William Kedjanyi has just been listening to Prime Minister Boris Johnson giving something of a COVID briefing. We record this on Monday morning, bang in the middle of November. The COVID situation not particularly good in many countries, including in Britain. And obviously Boris has had to deal with other things, including a dramatic slip in Tory polling, really, and obviously the fallout from Patterson affair. So lots going on to talk about this week, William, and also just a little bit of a bump for Sir Keir Starmer in terms of Labour's polling, and certainly interesting times ahead if you are involved anti-post in British politics.
Yeah, very much so. Welcome, everybody. We have seen a continuation, I think, of the, I think what we must say are notable, even if they're not massive, they're notable moves now across all pollsters. With regards to Westminster voting intention, Boris Johnson's approval ratings, the approval of the Conservative brand, and to a point, the approval of Keir Starmer. Although that said, Labour still, I think, have mainly stayed in the same place. What we are seeing now are Labour taking some poll leads. They've led with YouGov, they've led with Opinion, they've led with Redfield and Wilton. We go back a couple of months, and just on previous episodes of the polling station, we've been talking about how those pollsters have been showing really chunky Tory leads, enough for a majority, even though they were below the vote levels in 2019.
Let's talk market moves then, actually, and cut to the flesh here, because these are, as you say, they're not necessarily dramatic, but they are quite notable, and they're consistent with trends over the last month or so, where Conservatives' lead has been eroded. It's not a major surprise if you ask me, but at the same time, they did have a very strong lead. So what are we talking here?
So for the most seats in the next general election, the Tories now 8 to 15 from 4 to 9. Labour clipped into 13 to 8 from 15 to 8. Hung Parliament is now evens from 5 to 4. Conservative majority is now 11 to 8 from 21 to 20. I think that is the first time it hasn't been odds on since we've had that market up. Labour now 9 to 2 from 6 to 1 for a majority, ever such a slight cut. You've also, I think, seen some moves actually in the next Conservative leader and next PM markets, and also one in the Labour market.
A big move here.
Yeah, really big move. Bridget Phillipson is now 14 to 1, 33 to 1 to be the next Labour leader.
Where did this come from?
So this came from, I think we've seen a bit of interesting money for it. It's not a huge prize, not to downplay it, but Phillipson is one of quite a few female figures in Labour who have always very much, I think, been talked up by people close to Keir Starmer around the centre right of the party, who now have control of pretty much all things Labour. And Phillipson, who we've seen a bit more of recently as Labour have pushed out figures to give the Tories a hammering on sleaze and corruption, etc., has impressed people. I think it's fair to say, certainly impressed political insiders with her performance. And I think it's worth noting, these things will always be quite notable because, and I don't think this is unfair to Keir Starmer, Labour is filled with people around him who are better media performers than him, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So she's made quite a big impact on that front.
Just on the hold a vote and a ban on MP consultancy jobs, I see as well, which is quite interesting. And this is in light of the Scottish Tory leader, Douglas Ross. He failed to declare earnings. I had to laugh at this as an MSP and as a football referee for the SFA.
Yes, he has refereed at the Nou Camp in the Champions League, I'm very sure.
Wow.
There was a big furore about it at the time as well. I think it's something like £28,000 worth earnings I've declared, which is, I have to say, it's a big amount. It's a very big amount. I think you're meant to declare anything over £500. So plenty of MPs will do so because they'll write pieces for the Guardian or whatever, or the Telegraph, and they'll get paid for it, and then they'll do whatever with the money. But this is the latest in quite a lot of really egregious, very careless cases. Now, that's the debate to be had about whether you want MPs to have any sort of second job at all, whether you think it should all be banned, whether you want to let sort of the Rosanna Allen Khans of this world keep on going and doing A&E shifts. But some of these examples are mad. The Geoffrey Cox second, the Geoffrey Cox legal advice, you have to remember, was against, I think, the Foreign Office from, I think it was the Parliamentary Office, and also at the cost of £1 million a year. MPs in this country, some of our viewers might be in Ireland, in which case hello, are paid £81,000 a year. I think it's nearly double the average.
Which is justifiable. I think it's justifiable. I've never had a problem with politicians being well paid. It's just where you go after that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think one of the things people might have an issue with also is the amount of time that's consumed, purely because, you know, I think for Douglas Ross, it's definitely a money thing. £28,000 is more than quite a few people's yearly salaries. Millions of people make less than that in a year. But it's an all angles thing. With Patterson, it was the absolutely brazen lobbying with the likes of Cox, etc. I think the amount and also the time are coming into play. And I think also it just smacks of careless and indifference because, you know, as an example, if you're going to take away 20 quid in a universal credit for people, how can you say that you're a good representative if you're making thousands of times that? It won't really wash people. I think it's part of the reason we've seen a trend in the polls, but not the only one.
It's part of the reason, and this is quite dramatic. Boris is a 2-to-1 shot from 100 to 30 to be gone. In 2022, and 22 years later is 4-to-11, and this year is out to 25. Maybe time is running out a bit there, but a lot of people are expecting that next year is going to be pivotal for him.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge amount of dissatisfaction with Johnson inside the party that has presumably been bubbling below the surface for quite a while because it's sprung up enormously quickly. This has been rapid. Now, it's one of two situations. MPs are so very angry over the mishandling of the Patterson affair, despite all the other things that have gone wrong, that they want to head over it. Or MPs have always thought this about him, but he got us their seats. And, you know, they think, oh, well, he's got Brexit done. He's managed to oversee the first part of
Brexit done that's almost a stretch, but anyway.
Yeah, it is a stretch. That's not my opinion. That's just basically sort of the Tory phraseology. And they think, well, what are his uses, when it comes to anything but Brexit and basically sort of boosterism. Basically, sort of the shine has gone off very, very quickly. And the Tory party does dispose of its leaders fairly quickly, including ones who can look fairly secure. So with that in mind, not the biggest shock has been dissatisfaction. I think the amounts of it there, though, it is quite a shock. And you have to remember, Johnson has an 80-seat majority. It's an 80-seat majority that for many reasons, I think you have to say he won. Now, you can go and dig into all sorts of reasons why 2019 ended up as it did, but at the end of the day, he was the leader of the party for that. And now, not even really more than 2.5 years into that premiership, depending on who you're listening to, he's potentially on the ropes. And that's quite astonishing, really. But again, as you did say, and as you have said on previous episodes, it might just be one mishandling too many. This is not the first time the government has really screwed something up, either politically, in terms of internal party management, or just purely as a government. And maybe we are seeing some MPs begin to lose their patience.
19th of November, which is Thursday, is the deadline if you want to be a candidate for the by-election in North Shropshire. How important is this for his 2022 outlook? And obviously, this is a by-election that will be keenly observed.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's reasonably important. I think other things, to be honest with you, might have more of an impact. But as long as he wins it with a decent enough gap, I think that won't bring too much scrutiny. I think the issue will be with the after effects of things like the vote on MPs having second jobs, that motion today, things like inflation, and also things like infrastructure as well.
The train line I see is in the news as well.
Yes. Long story short, the government isn't taking HS2, I think, to its eastern leg. It's going for electrification of previous lines, or whatever. Now, you might be listening to this thinking, what does it have to do with market moves or political betting, whatever? Well, if you've got either a big anti-post position or none, things like where is the government on levelling up are going to play a big role at the next election, which, by the way, I think now is likely to be held in 2024. They'll want time to rebuild the brand or whatever. And we are seeing market moves related to that sort of thing.
Well, is this by-election not a perfect storm, though, in the sense of, like, everything's going wrong for the Conservatives going into it? Patterson's demise is obviously it's basically a motivation to vote for somebody else. 100 to 30 the Liberal Democrats, and obviously in the back of the Conservatives struggling in by-elections anyway this year.
Yeah, it's potentially a perfect storm. The only issue, the saving grace, however, is just that North Shropshire is a much better seat for the Tories to defend than Cheshire and Amersham. It's much better. The fundamentals are much better. Far less people who are uni graduates, far less people who voted Remain. There's anger, definitely, with the Tory party. I think it's through the country, but it's not the best testing ground, I don't think, for it. And also the anti-Patterson sentiment won't carry along as well, I don't think, for a candidate who isn't him, and who presumably hasn't been an MP before. But that is going to come down to how it's represented on the ground. And I can see why people are backing the Liberal Democrats. They were 4-1, they're now 100 to 30. And again, it is a pretty perfect storm for them. They have a long run up, a month or so, to really get down there in big numbers. And if that, I mean, that local ground game shouldn't be underestimated. I remember we had odds for Cheshire and Amersham, or Amersham, I should say, actually. And it was something like, I remember us being 10s on, I remember us being 7s on. And I think very few people, yeah, to be honest with you, saw that swing coming. Even the market, to a point, didn't really see it coming in the way I think that it's trying to for this by-election. So it's a danger. I don't see the Tories losing it, but if there is a massive swing and it becomes tight, and it wouldn't be like impossible for them to lose it. In the time I've been here, I think I've seen 5 big by-election shocks.
What time frame is that? What time frame is that?
I've been here 2 years doing what I do, and I've had the board for, I think maybe even before that. I remember going to Peterborough, expecting to see the Brexit party overturn Labour. That was not the case. A very effective ground game. Seen a couple this year, including, of course, those in the Blue Wall. And also, I think, you know, political betting shocks are, if anything, I think a bit more common nowadays. So it could definitely happen. Much of what is going to decide it is going to be down on factors on the ground.
Well, will Tory voters actually be arsed about getting out voting here is probably the question.
That's a really good question. My feeling is they'll definitely lose some to apathy. They're all the same in that regard. And I think also there's definitely a growing amount of people in the Conservative Party, and you see it in the polls, who have moved from being in the Conservative camp to don't want to vote for any of them. I don't know who I'm voting for. Some of this actually is also anti-Johnsonianism. They don't like the way that he operates, and that's shining and is wearing off. So that's going to be really interesting. And I think we'll definitely be talking about it on future Polling Stations episodes. Who knows, he might even be on our travels again.
Indeed. And I guess if we were to finish off, what is the latest on the beloved protocol? What's the latest on the EU and the UK? Where are we going with this? I mean, surely fatigue must have us almost dead at this stage in relation to this. And I know it's very important and all that, but what's happening?
So what's happening is Article 16. We're heading towards, I think, a triggering of it. There are the usual warnings. I think there's a confrontation of some sorts in the offing. If you had to put a gun to my head, I'd say it's be more likely it would trigger. We would be triggering it, I think, mainly because cakeism hasn't really worked. We've had this before, where there's been sort of heated rows between either our government and the EU directly, or our government and I think the Irish government, which we've sort of presumed to try and be the whole of the island of Ireland. Of course, not the case. And they've been over various things. Some have been smaller and some have been bigger. But long story short, we don't seem to like our own deal very much. Lord Frost doesn't seem to like it. Boris Johnson doesn't seem to like it.
One wonders, did he actually even read it at the time? But anyway.
Well, I really, really severely doubt Johnson read it. And if you take the word of Dominic Cummings as gospel, he didn't read or understand it. That's not that hard to believe. But alas, the bed has been made, and we don't seem to like lying in it. Whether it suits us to sort of ramp this rhetoric up, I think one could say
politics. It's plain politics. It's
yeah, definitely. Yeah. But whether it will actually be worth it going forward, even just for the political effect, I think is personally very debatable. I'd personally be a no on that. But then again, the decisions aren't taken, by me on the polling station. Unfortunately, they're taken by those in Whitehall. And at the moment, I think we are heading for another confrontation. And I think the blowback from that will be pretty immense. I wonder if, generally speaking, again, people are quite ready for that. The worst effects of Brexit have come either as a short, sharp shock or something slowly that's had a really big effect cumulatively over time, i.e. labour shortages, i.e. the supply chain issues, which have been exaggerated, I think, definitely, by Brexit. So that remains to be seen. I think it's coming around the corner. I think it'd be a terrible decision to trigger it, but I've said that about a lot of things. They've all happened. So that will be something very much to keep an eye on. Interestingly also, exclusive polling today, Sinn Féin still out in front in Northern Ireland, 24%, DUP on 18, they're recovering a bit the Union's vote, and then it's Alliance on 15.
Yeah, actually, that is interesting because the DUP had slipped markedly below 18, and maybe Jeffrey Johnson's leadership is helping a bit, but they are very much caught between a rock and a hard place, and that most voters in Northern Ireland are actually quite happy with the protocol, or certainly don't see it as a big issue in their lives. So the DUP have kind of backed themselves into a bit of a hole with it, but then again, they supported Brexit in the first place, so they've kind of had their cake, and if they're having their cake and eating it, or having their bed and lying in it, whatever analogy you want now, they can kind of go screw themselves as far as I'm concerned, because they've made this mess of their own making. I think that's about it for this week, William. What next week? So we've loads coming up between now and Christmas with the by-elections, with Boris's troubles with Brexit and so on.
Yes, indeed. We're going to keep on following this because they may not be the only market moves that we see. There's also a Redfield and Wilton poll, which will probably have come out by the time you watch this. And it'll be interesting to see if Labour keep their lead or if we see a swing back to the Conservatives. Neither result will be a surprise. Labour led by 1, that's marginal. These are all within the margin of error, but the trend is closing between the two. Now, does that keep on continuing? Because these stories haven't stopped. We are on day 11 of this, and everybody's now been dragged into it. Or does the focus move elsewhere, in which case people return back to the Tory fold? I wouldn't be surprised at any results in the upcoming polls this week. I wait to see what the market does as well.
Thank you for your time, William.
Thank you very much for yours.
Yeah, that was the polling station, and on November 15th edition. More problems for Boris, more problems in terms of COVID, more problems in terms of Brexit, problems for the Tories, and we shall be back next week.